Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The fabric of a wedding is, by its very nature, a fragile tapestry. Woven from threads of hope, promise, and public declaration, it is designed to be a beautiful display, but its strength is rarely tested until a sudden sharp force pulls at its seams. In the world of Port Charles, where emotions run as high as the stakes in any corporate takeover or medical crisis, such tests are not merely metaphorical. They are explosive, visceral, and often play out in the most exquisitely inappropriate settings. The wedding of Willow Tate and Michael Corinthos was destined to be such an occasion, a gathering less of unadulterated joy and more of a tense, collective holding of breath. It was an event where the uninvited ghosts of the past had RSVP'd in force, and where the delicate balance of a dozen fractured relationships hung in the air, as palpable as the scent of the wedding flowers. Yet no one, not even the most seasoned observer of the town's relentless dramas, could have predicted that the catalyst for the evening's unraveling, and perhaps perversely its salvation, would be a single resounding slap. A slap delivered not in a shadowy alley or a heated boardroom, but in the sanctified space of the wedding venue itself. A slap from Drew Kane, a man whose very identity had been a question mark for so long, to Nina Reeves, the woman whose secrets threatened to dismantle the entire proceedings. This was not merely an act of anger. It was a seismic event, a shockwave strong enough to alter trajectories, freeze exits, and ultimately keep Willow Tate from leaving her own wedding. To understand the profound weight of that moment, one must first appreciate the intricate, often toxic lattice of relationships that converged upon that day. Willow Tate, once a quiet schoolteacher, had been forged in the crucible of Port Charles into a survivor. Her journey to the altar was paved with illness, both physical and emotional, with betrayal, and with a hard-won reconciliation with her mother, the reformed, or so it seemed, mob matriarch Carly Corinthos. Her love for Michael Corinthos, son of Carly and the legendary Sonny Corinthos, was genuine, a beacon of stability in a chaotic world. Yet, their union was perpetually shadowed by the specter of Nina Reeves. Nina, the mercurial editor-in-chief of Crimson, was a woman driven by a lifetime of loss and a subsequent, often misguided, quest for connection and retribution. She was Michael's biological aunt, a fact that added layers of complexity to an already fraught dynamic. Her greatest sin in the eyes of the Corinthos family and their allies was her decision to report Carly and Drew to the Securities and Exchange Commission for insider trading, an act of vengeance that led to their incarceration. The reporting was a bomb, but the fallout was radioactive and enduring. It bred a hatred in Michael so pure and focused it became his defining characteristic. It shattered any fragile peace between Nina and Sonny, with whom she'd shared a complicated romantic history, and it placed Drew Kane squarely in the role of an unexpected, and somewhat reluctant, avenger. Drew, having recently reclaimed his life and identity from his brother, Jason Morgan, had served time because of Nina's actions. His relationship with Carly, forged in the shared trauma of prison and a deep platonic bond, meant that her enemies were his. Yet Drew was not Michael. His anger, while profound, was often tempered by a fundamentally decent, almost optimistic core, a legacy of his Navy SEAL discipline and his own search for peace. He wanted justice, perhaps, but not necessarily the total annihilation of Nina's life. Michael, however, did. This wedding was, for Michael, not just a celebration of love, but a victory lap, a demonstration of the family unity Nina had failed to destroy. His unforgiving stance was the brittle foundation upon which the day was built. Nina's presence at the wedding was, therefore, an act of monumental audacity or profound self-delusion, likely both. Invited by Willow as a gesture of fragile, familial bridge-building, Nina was, through a twist of fate, the grandmother to Willow and Michael's son Wiley. Her attendance was a point of severe contention. For Michael it was an insult, a stain on his perfect day. His forbearance was a thin veneer over a boiling rage, maintained only for Willow's sake. Willow herself was caught in an agonizing pull. Her heart belonged to Michael, and she understood his pain, but a part of her, the part that had known forgiveness and second chances, hoped for a sliver of reconciliation, or at least a civil détente, for the sake of family unity and her own peace. This internal conflict made her vulnerable, a hair's breadth from being overwhelmed by the tension she was trying to mediate. The ceremony itself proceeded, a testament to the human ability to perform normalcy under immense strain. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed, and a kiss sealed the union. But the reception was where the masks began to slip. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and sidelong glances. Every polite conversation was a minefield. And then the inevitable collision occurred. In a quiet corner, or perhaps not so quiet, words were exchanged between Nina and Drew. The content of that conversation is key. It was likely not a simple rehashing of old grievances. Nina, ever the provocateur, perhaps cloaked in a guise of apology or justification, might have said something that struck at the very heart of Drew's sense of honor, his time in prison, or his protective feelings for Carly. She may have implied that he deserved his fate, or that Carly had manipulated him, or perhaps she expressed no remorse at all, instead framing her actions as morally justified. For Drew, a man who had lost years of his life, who had fought to get back to his son, Scout, and to build something new, this was the final spark. The slap was not a premeditated act. It was a physical culmination, a kinetic release of months of suppressed fury, frustration, and a sense of profound violation. It was the body moving before the mind could censure it. The sound would have cut through the murmur of the reception like a gunshot, a sharp, shocking crack that silences everything. In its immediate aftermath, a bubble of surreal stillness would have enveloped the scene. Nina's head turned to the side, a hand rising to her stinging cheek, her eyes wide with a mixture of pain, humiliation, and defiance. Drew standing with his hand still poised in the air, a look of stormy triumph and instant regret warring on his face. And then the bubble would pop, and the room would erupt. Gasps, chairs scraping, outraged cries. Sonny would likely be on his feet, his own violent tendencies surging to the fore, held back only by Carly or his wife, perhaps seeing in Drew's action an echo of his own methods. Carly's reaction would be complex, a flash of grim satisfaction quickly overshadowed by the knowledge that this public spectacle was a disaster. Michael's response would be one of cold fury, not at the act itself, but at the disruption of his wedding, the scene drawing all attention to the very person he wanted to erase from the day. But the most critical reaction, the one that truly mattered in that precise moment, was Willow's. Willow, in her wedding dress, the symbol of her new beginning, would have been frozen. The violence, so raw and personal, would have shattered the already fragile illusion of harmony she had been clinging to. This was no longer about whispered arguments or cold shoulders. This was physical, brutal, and undeniable. Her instinct, honed by a life of avoiding conflict and seeking safer emotional ground, would have been flight. To flee the toxicity, the embarrassment, the sheer pain of seeing her wedding devolve into a public brawl. She might have turned from Michael, tears in her eyes, and made a move for the door. She might have uttered the words, "I can't do this." Her dream of a perfect day incinerated in that single slap. The path to the exit would have seemed the only sane option, a way to reclaim some shred of dignity and peace. But the slap, paradoxically, was also a circuit breaker. It was so extreme, so shocking, that it stopped the slow simmering bleed of tension and created a sudden acute crisis. In doing so, it changed the calculus entirely. Before the slap, the poison was diffuse, ambient. Willow could feel it weakening her, making her question the very foundation of the day, but it was hard to point to one thing as the cause. Now the poison had a source, a focal point, and it had been violently expelled into the open. The slap crystallized the conflict. It drew a line. In that moment of chaos, as Willow's feet might have been moving toward the door, several realizations could have crashed upon her simultaneously, anchored by the echoing sound of that slap. First, it would underscore the absolute depth of her new family's wound. Drew was not a hot-headed teenager. He was a responsible man, a father, a former soldier. For him to be driven to physical violence spoke to a level of hurt and anger that theoretical discussions of betrayal could never convey. It made Nina's transgression viscerally real to Willow in a new way. It was no longer just a business or legal betrayal. It was an act that could drive good people to their breaking point. If Drew, the relative voice of reason compared to Michael, was pushed this far, could Michael's unrelenting hatred be so irrational? The slap, in its brutality, validated the pain of the people she loved most. Second, it would force a stark alignment. There was no more middle ground. The slap created a before and after. By fleeing, Willow would, in effect, be choosing to abandon her husband and his family in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic attack on them, as they would see it. She would be prioritizing her own discomfort over the very real, now physically demonstrated pain of her new spouse. It would be a betrayal of the for better or for worse vow she had just taken, and at the first instance of worse. To leave would be to side by default with the provocateur Nina. The slap made neutrality impossible. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it would trigger her deepest protective instincts, not for Nina but for Michael and for the union she had just vowed to protect. Seeing Drew strike Nina might have ignited a fierce wifely loyalty. Michael's rage, which she often found frightening and exhausting, was now contextualized by an act so egregious it provoked a physical response from another. Her desire to comfort Michael, to stand with him against this external shock, could suddenly overpower her desire to escape the situation. The crisis demanded a partner, not a fugitive. The slap created a common enemy, a unifying point of outrage that momentarily streamlined the complicated familial politics. Furthermore, the public nature of the event played a role. Leaving would create a second, even more devastating scene. It would humiliate Michael utterly, and make their wedding the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. Willow's own sense of pride and her commitment to the family name, the Corinthos name she had just willingly taken, would rebel against granting Nina that kind of victory. By weathering the storm with her husband, she could help reclaim the narrative. They could present a united front, a family attacked but unbroken. Thus, the slap, an act of violence meant to punish Nina, became the shocking adhesive that held Willow in place. The force of it didn't just sting Nina's cheek. It shook Willow's entire perspective, jolting her out of a passive distress and into a state of active, conscious choice. The path of least resistance was the door, but the slap made that path seem like a betrayal of her new vows. It made staying as difficult and painful as it was, the path of loyalty, love, and strength. The aftermath of the slap would ripple far beyond the wedding reception, of course. For Drew, the consequences would be severe. He may have felt a momentary surge of righteousness, but in the cold light of day, he is a man who assaulted a woman at a wedding. The social, legal, and personal fallout would be immense. It could damage his relationship with his brother, Jason, who might understand the motive but deplore the loss of control. It would strain his bond with Carly, who might feel responsible. It could even affect his custody arrangements for Scout. The slap could mark a dark turn for Drew, pulling him away from the light he sought and into the murkier, more violent waters of Port Charles vengeance. For Nina, the slap is both a humiliation and a perverse gift. It allows her to recast herself from perpetrator to victim. The woman who destroyed lives with a phone call can now point to her reddened cheek and demand sympathy. It could harden her heart further, justifying any future actions she takes against the Corinthos clan. Or, in a remote possibility, the shock of such visceral hatred could be the catalyst for a genuine moment of self-reckoning, forcing her to truly confront the destruction she has wrought. More likely, it fuels her war. For Michael and Willow, the event becomes a foundational trauma of their marriage. It is the worst they survive together at the very moment of their beginning. Michael may feel a twisted gratitude toward Drew for doing what he longed to do, while also resenting the spectacle. It will deepen his conviction that Nina is a cancer that must be cut out, and he may pressure Willow to sever all ties, using the slap as ultimate proof of Nina's toxic nature. Willow's internal conflict will not be resolved, merely forced underground. She stayed, but the reasons for wanting to leave, the suffocating anger, the relentless feud remain. The slap may have kept her from physically leaving the wedding, but it cannot by itself mend the fractures in her heart or in the family. It simply adds another layer of painful complexity. In the grand operatic tapestry of Port Charles, where love is forever intertwined with revenge and healing is always a precursor to the next wound. The slap at Willow and Michael's wedding stands as a defining moment. It was an act of pure, unvarnished ID, cutting through the elaborate scripts of polite enmity. Its strength was not just in the force that connected with Nina's face, but in the psychological shockwave it generated. It was strong enough to break the spell of a crumbling facade and force a brutal, clarifying truth into the open. And in doing so, it was strong enough to pivot a bride on her heel, to turn her away from the door and back toward the tumultuous, damaged, but fiercely loved man she had just married. The wedding continued, not as a celebration of untroubled love, but as a testament to the messy, painful, and enduring bonds that are forged not in spite of the chaos, but within its very eye. The slap was a disaster, a scandal, a violent mistake. And yet, in the paradoxical logic of a world like General Hospital, it was also, for one fragile moment, the only thing holding everything together. Willow stood near the back of the wedding venue, her hands trembling as she held onto the small clutch bag she brought with her. The music was fading as guests began shifting to find their seats, but she wasn't paying attention to any of it. Her eyes were fixed on the swirling tension between Michael and Drew across the room, the kind of tension she had prayed wouldn't erupt today. But of course it had. Because nothing in Port Charles was ever simple, not even a wedding. "I can't do this, I can't stay here," Willow whispered to herself, voice cracking as she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. She had been holding it together for weeks, trying to navigate the mess between Drew and Sunny, between Michael and everyone else, between her loyalty to her family and her desperate need for peace. But now, watching Drew go after Michael as if the two had forgotten where they were, she felt the familiar panic rising. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want more conflict. And she certainly didn't want to be trapped in the middle of something she never asked for. Michael reached for her arm as she stepped back, his voice soft but firm. "Willow, don't go. Just wait. Everything's going to calm down." But she shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I can't be here, Michael. I told you I didn't want to come today. I said it was going to blow up and look." She gestured toward Drew, who was still muttering under his breath, visibly shaking with anger. "It already did." Michael exhaled, shoulders tense. "Look, Drew just needed a minute. He's upset about Sunny being here. Everyone is on edge, but it'll settle. Please don't leave." Willow swallowed. "Why do I always feel like the only one worried about keeping the peace? Why am I stuck between you and your uncle? Why does everything have to be a war?" Michael opened his mouth, but before he could respond, Drew walked toward them, his steps hard, jaw set. "You two all right?" he asked, but his tone was anything but gentle. Willow stiffened. "Drew, please," she said quietly, hoping her voice might diffuse the tension. I think I should go." Drew's expression hardened further, and he turned sharply toward Michael. "You see what you did? You dragged her into this mess, and now she feels like she needs to run. Do you even hear yourself?" Michael took a step closer. "Don't blame me for your issues with Sunny. You brought that fight into this room, not me." Drew's nostrils flared. This wedding should have been safe. For everyone. Including Willow. Michael scoffed, low and bitter. "Yeah, well, maybe stop trying to make every moment about what Sunny did to you. Because this right here? You're doing the same thing you accuse him of." The pressure in Willow's chest tightened. "Please stop," she said, but they were too far gone. Drew jabbed a finger toward Michael. "You don't get it. You never have. Sunny ruins lives. I'm not going to pretend he's welcome just because we're forced to be here today." Michael spoke through clenched teeth. "You think you're the only one who ever made a mistake with him? You think I don't know what he's capable of? You think..." "Enough," Willow cried, but her voice barely carried over their shouting. She pressed a hand to her forehead, dizzy from the noise. "I need air." She turned to walk away, desperate to escape, when suddenly Drew grabbed her arm, not forcefully but urgently. "Willow, wait," he said. "Don't leave. Not because of me. Please." But Michael witnessed the motion and reacted instinctively, stepping between them. "Don't touch her." Michael snapped. "She said she wants to go." Drew glared at him. "She's family. I'm allowed to talk to her." Willow felt nausea rise. "Please. Both of you. Stop." But Drew's fuse had already burned down to the last spark. Michael's voice had pushed him too far, Sunny's presence had pushed him too far. The months of stress and anger had pushed him too far. And then with one final heated exchange, Michael muttered, "You've become exactly what you hate." Something inside Drew snapped. In one swift, uncontrollable motion, Drew raised his hand and slapped Michael across the face. Loud, sharp, echoing through the wedding hall with a sound that cut Willow to her core. Gasps rose around them. A woman dropped her wine glass. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Michael staggered back a step, stunned. Drew stood frozen, hand still halfway in the air, the reality of what he'd done washing over him in waves of shock and regret. Willow covered her mouth with trembling fingers, Breath caught in her throat. "Drew," she whispered, but her voice shook. Michael touched the side of his face, disbelief flooding his expression. "You hit me," he said quietly. Drew dropped his hand, eyes closing for a moment. I didn't mean Michael, damn it." Willow backed away. "This is exactly why I wanted to leave," she managed, her voice cracking. "This right here, this violence, this anger. This isn't who we are supposed to be." Drew turned toward her, guilt twisting his features. "Willow, no. Don't leave. Please don't leave because of something I did." Michael stepped forward, voice strained but steady. "Willow, let's just go outside for a minute." "Stop," she cried, tears finally spilling over. "I'm tired of choosing between you two. I'm tired of feeling like everything is pulling us apart. I just wanted a normal day. A normal wedding. But this." She shook her head. "This is too much." She took another step back, but Drew moved toward her, panic flashing across his face. "Willow, listen to me. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have hit him, I know that. But don't walk away. Not like this. Not thinking I'm some violent monster. Please." His voice cracked in a way she had never heard from him before. Willow looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the desperation, the remorse, the exhaustion in his eyes. She didn't know what to say. Michael placed a hand over hers gently. "Willow, come with me. We can go home, or we can go outside, or we can go anywhere else. You don't need to stay in this madness." Drew shook his head firmly. "No. She shouldn't leave. Not because of us. Not because of me." Willow's breath faltered. "Drew, you slapped Michael." Drew swallowed. "I know. And it was wrong. But it woke me up. I'm not letting my anger cost me more family. I'm not letting it push you out of this room." The sincerity in his tone cut through some of the chaos swirling in her mind. She lowered her eyes, shoulders sinking. "Why does it always come to this?" Drew took a step closer but kept his hands at his sides, voice softer now. "Because I've been angry for too long. Because I've been hurt for too long. Because I haven't known where to put that pain. But I swear to you, Willow, I never wanted to drag you into it. And I won't lose you over one terrible moment." Michael stood silently, torn between protecting Willow and accepting that Drew was genuinely broken over what just happened. Willow inhaled shakily, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what about the wedding? What about the families watching us right now? What about the fact that everyone probably heard that slap?" Drew exhaled through his nose. "They heard it. And they're going to talk about it. But what matters right now is you. And you staying." Willow's eyes glistened. "Why? Why is it so important that I stay?" Drew's voice cracked again. "Because every time a situation gets hard, someone walks out. I can't stand the thought of you walking out because of something I did. Not you, Willow. Not today." Michael sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Willow, it's your call. Just whatever you decide, I'll respect it." The room had gone quieter now, though whispers still floated in the air. Willow looked around at the stunned faces, at the shattered tension lingering like smoke after a fire. Her heart pounded as she tried to steady herself. She lifted her chin, breathing deeply, struggling to find strength she didn't feel she had. "Fine," she whispered finally. "I'll stay. But only if we all sit down, stay quiet and stop fighting. No matter what happens." Drew nodded immediately, relief washing over him like a wave. "Thank you," he breathed. Michael nodded too, though the bruise beginning to form on his cheek stood as a reminder of what had just happened. "All right. We stay," he said quietly. Willow took both of their hands, hesitantly but with determination, and guided them toward the seating area. Guests watched with thinly veiled curiosity, some whispering, some staring openly, but she ignored it all. She sat down between them, feeling the lingering tremble in her body, but also feeling something else, a strange, fragile sense of control. Drew remained painfully quiet, his hands clasped tightly together, eyes occasionally drifting toward her with shame. Michael sat still, shoulders stiff, but every now and then he glanced at her with gratitude for staying. The ceremony slowly resumed, and as the music swelled again, Willow let out a breath she had been holding since the moment the argument began. She wasn't sure how the rest of the day would unfold. She wasn't sure how Drew and Michael would repair the damage between them. She wasn't sure how she would recover from almost running out in the middle of everything. But she stayed. And somehow, despite the chaos, Staying felt like the strongest choice she had made in a long time. The slap had stopped her, stunned her, rattled her. But it had also forced everyone to pause, to confront the spiraling emotions and face what really mattered. And as the vows began, Willow squeezed Drew's hand gently, a silent gesture that said, "This has to change. All of it." Drew squeezed back, his voice soft enough for only her to hear. "It will. I promise." And for the first time in a long while, Willow allowed herself to believe it.